Welcome. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to Project 3 in EDU 525. It's on supporting social and emotional learning. We're going to walk through the requirements or what you need to do for part 1 of the project. So I've gone to the course menu and navigated my way to the Project 3 instructions and rubric page, and I want to scroll down the page first to the directions document. And so when I get to the directions, if I scroll down through, there are 3 parts that make up Project 3. The first is Part 1, which is on evaluation. Part 2 is the SEL action plan. And then Part 3 is the self-assessment. So these all 3 of these items should ultimately really be submitted as separate documents, as 3 separate documents. But before I go into the details of Part 1 and the evaluation, the other piece I want to go back down to is the very, very bottom to the supporting materials. And I want to remind you that it's important that you look at the supporting materials for each individual project. And the first one I want to highlight is the student data profile. So I want to click on that data profile, and I want to remind you, you've already been working with this particular data profile on your previous 2 projects, but I want to re-emphasize that you are basically assuming that individuals in your particular course that you teach right now, whether it's 3rd grade math or algebra 1 or what high school, middle school, elementary school, whatever grade level it is you may teach, you're writing all of these projects from the perspective that the 40 students that are identified within this student data profile sheet are in your course. So you have 4 students with 504 plans, 5 students who are gifted, 4 students with IEPs, and of course there's more specific information about those individual categories of students listed by the bullet points, but it's important that you be familiar with that and re-look at that information, review it before you begin working on your project. So let's jump back over to part 1, which is the evaluation piece. And it says, to begin planning for social and emotional learning, or SEL, for your class, you must first evaluate the student profile data you collected about your students, which is what we just did, provided in the supporting materials section. To consider their unique needs in this area, your evaluation must include the following. So it starts out with an overview or an introduction, and that is simply to provide the project parameters template. Again, that's at the very bottom in the supporting materials. You'll want to open that, download it, and fill it out. Please be detailed with that. That's not something that needs citations, but we do want you to use complete sentences and be descriptive with the information you provide on that parameters template. Once you've completed that, the next thing you're going to work on is the student SEL development needs. And it says, evaluate the student profile data in the supporting materials section. And then you have 2 specific items that you're going to have to complete for the evaluation part. The first one is that you're going to identify which specific core SEL competencies it will be important for the students in your class, as described in the student data profile provided in the section, to develop. Use only competencies included in the core SEL competencies from CASEL. So you'll need to open that resource. You'll need to explore those competencies. They are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, and so forth. You'll need to specifically explore that and look at what each of those items means by exploring the website. Again, there's videos on the website. There are all kinds of different resources. And from there, you are going to choose, and it doesn't give a specific number, but in order to really meet the requirements for the project, you need to select at least 2 to 3. If you want to select more than 3, you're fine to do that, but you really want to pull out at least 2 to 3 of those competencies on that website, on that resource, whether they be self-awareness, self-management, and you have to understand what each represents, and to tie them back to that student data profile in your course specific. And then once you've done that, so what you're going to do when you identify them, you're not just going to say, hey, I'm going to pick these 2 and that's it. You're going to actually cite different resources to explain not in a lot of detail, but in enough detail so that any reader would be able to understand what each of the ones that you've chosen represents or means. And then on top of that, in a separate paragraph, you're going to, or in a separate section, you're going to use or address the second bullet point, which is to explain the reasons why you selected these specific SEL-related competencies based on the unique attributes of your students, the level of the class you are teaching, and even the course topic and lessons you will teach. So you'll have to pull together the information from the CASEL site to get that second bullet point addressed. You'll have to pull information from your parameters template and from your actual course and triangulate all those pieces together. And it does specifically say that you need to support your explanation by citing sources from this project or other credible sources you find. And last week I did share a video with you that talked about all the resources that are already available in the course. And I also showed you how to use the Shapiro library to search for additional resources. But both bullet points do need to come along with citations, because in bullet point 1, you are identifying and describing those SEL competencies. And then in part 2 of in the second bullet point, or the second part of part 1, you're actually going through and explaining why you chose those. So there's 2 important parts to that evaluation piece. If I go down to the bottom real fast to what to submit and I look at the evaluation, basically it says you will write an evaluation in the form of a document that contains 2 sections. 1, the project parameters you defined using the template provided in the supporting materials section, and 2, a list of the specific SEL competencies important for the students described in the student profile data set to develop, along with an explanation of why you selected these competencies. Again, do not forget to explain. Basically, you're not just defining the SEL competency, you're explaining what it means and everything like that. And then in a separate item, you're actually talking about why you chose that item. So define it, explain it, and then from there, explain why you chose it. That's a separate explanation. And it does say that all that has to have APA style formatting. Now it does say 2 to 3 pages. Again, as I've said in the past, the goal is not to try to get to a target of the page limit. Your project parameters template is going to take up almost a whole entire page of your part 1 submission. So once you factor that in, if you're saying I'm just going to shoot for 2 pages, you're really only writing a page of content. So you're not focused on the page limit or page length information that's provided. You're focused on providing specific responses to each of the required items, which are the 2 bullet points. So I wanted to go through and introduce this part. In the next video, we'll go through and look at part 2, the SEL action plan. But I did want to go through this information to help you get started. As you start working on Project 3, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and ask any questions you may have.